sure most of you know who this is. It's Pavarotti, one of the most famous opera singers to ever live. The guy that made opera cool and popular in the 20th century. But what is he singing? Only 3.7% of the UK population actually saw an opera in 2017, so I can't blame you for not knowing. I mean, compare that to the millions that go to cinemas and have streaming service subscriptions. It's clear that opera is for a minority of people these days. And I suppose for a lot of opera's history, it really has been for a minority of people. It could be said that opera is the direct descendant of medieval entertainment, for the wealthiest of a feudal system. The earliest evidence we have of an opera performance lands on the border of the medieval era and the Renaissance, with Baroque Period's opera Eurydice being performed in 1600. But how has opera evolved since those early days? Who were some of opera's biggest players? What was Pavarotti singing, and who is opera for now? That's what we'll be looking at here on Ben Shares. I understand that lots of people don't like opera, and that is an opinion that I respect, but one that I hope to help overturn. To understand why opera isn't boring now, we have to understand why it once was. What was opera in those early days? Opera's earliest proponents believed that they were creating a Frankenstein's monster, though they didn't say so at the time because Frankenstein hadn't been written yet. The combination of music and lyricism and poesy in perfect equilibrium with drama and production and costume. Opera was to be the drastic scale-up of court mask balls and musical interludes in entertainment, like the car was the scale-up of carriages in transport. It was the biggest, latest revolution in leisure since theatre. But at the start, such as in L'Orfeo, the lyrics and plot focused on the fantastical. It was the Renaissance after all. It can't be a coincidence that the popular first operas were adaptations of Greek myths. Orpheus, the most talented musician in all the world save Apollo himself, adventurer, Argonaut among Jason, Heracles and Castor, he was among the finest heroes of his day. Orpheus faced the tragedy of his beloved wife Eurydice, the beautiful nymph daughter of Apollo, dead before her time. Only the power of his music could help him to retrieve her from the underworld. I won't spoil the ending of the myth because it is one of my favourites and I want you to read it or watch the opera, but it's clear that opera was to tackle the grand, the fantastical and the immense. These early operas fall into the Baroque period, which is a style of classical music that I like very much. You might be familiar with Baroque composers like Bach and Handel. Purcell and Vivaldi and Pachelbel and our very own Monteverdi. In fact, in 1683, John Blow supposedly premiered the first surviving English opera, Venus and Adonis. Again, mythical figures dominating opera even towards the end of the 17th century and the Baroque period. But these early operas fall short. Even with source material so beautiful and moving, the Greek myths, these early operas only show hints of the possibilities of what opera could do. Don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy them. But you get the sense that these were the prototype, the not fully fledged, the first, but not necessarily the best. Unlike a play with songs like Shakespeare's The Tempest that were common in the 16th and early 17th century.
How now? Moody.
An opera added the extra musical element of all lines being lyrics and being sung. But the true benefit of this musical quality wasn't to be taken advantage of until much later. It wasn't until 1767 that the classical period of opera would really take off. It was Gluck. It required William Gluck, a German, to quench the audience's thirst for reform opera, something different to the repetitive, expected style that had been churned out of Italy for so long. And what was this grand change? What was it that Gluck did to change opera and music forever? It seems so simple now that it's obvious. It's one of the first things that we associate with opera. I'll explain. The early operas of the Baroque period made use of singers alongside only a few instruments, keys and bass cellos. But Gluck initiated the use of a full orchestra that transitioned the style of opera from recitativo stesso to recitativo accompagnato, from Baroque to classical. The classical period produced the majority of household name composers. We've got Haydn, Mendelssohn, Brahms, Schubert, Strauss, Paganini, Beethoven, and of course Mozart. Sorry if I didn't mention your favourite one, there are a lot. But what else changed in this period? Well, Francesco Algarotti wrote Essay on the Opera, imaginative name, 1755, which suggested something key for the success of the best operas, something that the best composers would keep in mind. All of the elements, the singing, instrumentation, staging, dance, must all be subservient to the drama. In Gluck's own words, beautiful simplicity was the overarching goal of good opera. It was Mozart that carried Gluck's baton onwards, becoming one of opera's greatest and most iconic composers. The classical era revolutionized the technical elements of music, and in particular opera, and it wasn't without the building blocks of the medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and classical eras that a new era could begin. The Romantic era. This is the era that opera is mastered in, the culmination of centuries of evolution of the form. Many critics consider Verdi to be the greatest operatic composer ever. So, what happens when you want to play basketball, but Michael Jordan has already mastered it? Play tennis, but Roger Federer is the greatest of all time? Or write opera when Verdi has perfected it? You don't replace them. You join them. 90% of people admit that they have cried while listening to a piece of music, but only between 5 and 10% have cried in front of a painting. It's scientifically recorded that music has a profound effect on us anatomically and emotionally, and in my opinion, it was Puccini that understood how to maximize this as a composer of operas. Puccini understood that the addition of musicality to drama was the musical equivalent of impressionism in visual art. The drama should capture the mundane, but the music should leave naturalism and realism behind and make you not see what the characters are feeling as in a play, but make you share what the character is feeling through the music's heightened expression. There is an important distinction to be made between the events of our lives and the experiences of them. The events can be as dull as ditch water, but the experience is that event married up to the sensations and emotions, and at times overwhelming feelings that we have in response to those events. Puccini wrote some of the best operas of all time. No wonder that the majority of you knew what Pavarotti was singing, Nessun Dorma from Turandot by Puccini. It's one of opera's most famous arias after being popularised by Pavarotti. But why am I making such a big deal out of this? Turandot, with all its wonderful Nessun Dorma goodness, is not in most top 5 Puccinis, let alone their top 5 operas. The quality of Puccini is astounding. Even if you've never heard of Puccini before, you've probably seen his work, because it's almost always somewhere in a film in any given year. Think A Room with a View, Quantum of Solace, or more recently Tenet. Whether it's Tosca, Madame Butterfly, La Fucciala del Vest, Puccini's genius is clear. Ultimately, Puccini's greatest contribution in its totality is La Bohème. It's often described as the perfect first opera for people to see, but is also described, for the same reasons, to be the most complete opera ever written. A good example of how close to perfection this opera is that John Copley, the director of many performances of Bohème at the Royal Opera House, has described it as a joy and an easy opera to perform. Possibly due to the fact that Puccini, unlike most opera writers, left stage directions and set descriptions. Bohème is so complete because it appears as if the whole opera fell out of Puccini's head and onto his manuscripts. Part of its completeness must be due to the difference in subject matter between operas that came before it, from fantastical to naturalistic, from goddesses of love to young love. The introduction of the Verissimo movement of the Romantic period confirms this. But a great deal is down to Puccini's mastery of emotion. This is achieved by not only presenting scenarios that an audience can easily relate to, like being a poor student, but also by marrying the melody up to the lyrics, so that the sentiment behind the words feel almost as if they've been doubled. In addition, the plot itself covers every basis that you can imagine. The strife of friends through poverty as they struggle on to achieve their dreams whilst love lingers in the air, all before that cruelty of life, tragedy, sets in. Think the mastery of Romeo and Juliet, but there are no feuding families, just life, struggling on against death. It seems that opera evolved a great deal over time, influenced by the ever-changing cultural and societal periods. But perhaps one man, who had no business being so great a composer, gave opera one of its finest gems, just when everyone thought that the art of opera was past its prime.